Now, we're here today with Phyllis Baumann, and Phyllis has generously agreed to be interviewed by us in R.O.B.S for our oral history questionnaire. Phyllis, you retired in 1992, same year that
Same year as you did,
Okay.
yes.
Where are you living now?
I'm living up in Brewster, New York, in Putnam County, on the border of Connecticut.
And you moved up there right after retirement?
No, we moved in 1994.
Okay, so you must have looked around a little bit before you decided to make the move.
Well, we looked at Boca Raton.
Oh, you did?
We looked in North Carolina. We looked in many, many places in Westchester and went up as far as Putnam until we could find something that we could afford. And that led us near our children.
Oh, really? They're up there?
Yes, our daughter's in Richfield, Connecticut. And
Okay,
our son.
tell me about the children. Tell me, name them, and because they're going to see this, so you want to give them
Well,
some...
I have two children. We have two children. Edith Marie Callis, who is now 36 and lives in Richfield, Connecticut, and Andrew Lawrence Polvey, who lives in Medfield, Massachusetts, and he is just turned 35. Edith is married and has a husband named Steve, and we have two grandchildren, John Stephen Callis, who is 5, and Gabriella Clements Callis, who is 3, going on 3.5.
Okay. And your son, does he...
Our son is not married.
Is not married. Okay. Now tell me, first, talking about the grandchildren, because they're also going to see this. They're going to hear their names too. Tell me about both of them, and tell me about the qualities that you see already at this point in their lives.
They are both bright, intelligent, quick, creative. Johnny is a thinker. He has to think things through before he will do them. He's wonderful in math. And he's got a great imagination.
Phyllis, is there anybody in the family that has that same talent?
I think he's very much like
I
think he's like his father's side of the family in
Really?
a lot of his ways.
Uh-huh.
And he probably is also like maybe some of the qualities that in his mother's side of the family too.
Okay.
And Gabriella is her mother's clone. Do you hear me? They say you get a payback every time, and Gabriella is.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Gabriella she is extremely bright. Also, she has an imagination.
Just like her mother, right?
Just like her mother, she's loves all sports. She's also like my mother. She's also like
Really?
her maternal great grandmother.
What about the family face? Has that showed up too? Can you see it?
I think she looks very much like my mother and her own mother.
Uh-huh.
She's in their coloring.
Oh,
And
nice.
John is like a dirty blonde and is more like his father's side of the family. And also, people say that he also looks like my son Andrew, his uncle.
Now, what is Andrew doing these days?
Andrew is the owner of a Domino Pizza
Okay.
in Dedham, Massachusetts.
Uh-huh.
And
All
he graduated from Johnson & Wales, and my daughter graduated from Cardozo Law School.
Now, both of your kids then went through the Brentwood schools.
No,
right?
they started in Brentwood, but I moved back to Bayshore.
Okay.
So they're both products of the Bayshore public school system.
Okay.
Edith was an all-star sports and field hockey. She was a member of the first field hockey team for the first Empire State Games in Syracuse.
Oh, my.
With the field hockey team from Suffolk County that went on to win the gold medal. And she then
who in the family was athletic before this generation?
Well, my mother had always wanted to be a phys ed teacher, but back then she did not pursue that career.
That was
she
a
became a
dream deferred.
secretary.
Okay. Uh-huh.
So possibly there. And I enjoyed sports when I was growing up.
Okay.
And my while she was in high school, she pursued both sports and music, and she got accepted into the Eastman School of Music and played string bass. She then transferred to Juilliard, graduated from Juilliard, and then went on.
Wow.
While she was a senior in Juilliard, she went on to the Fashion Institute of Technology.
My goodness.
Got a degree at merchandising, and then continued on to Cardozo Law School and became a lawyer.
Whew.
So she's an attorney in New York City.
Is she practicing it?
Oh, yeah, she's a practicing attorney. in New York City.
What an education that was.
And Andrew did not particularly practice sports, but he enjoyed drama. And I think his mentor in high school might have been Mr. D'Antoni, the English teacher. And he went on and he took his 2 years at R.O.B.S. And then he went on to Johnson & Wales. And while he was in Johnson & Wales, he needed money, so he worked for a Domino's Pizza up in Rhode Island.
And learned the business. And stayed with the business. And Boy,
Domino's likes you to begin at the bottom and work your way up. And he began at the bottom, worked his way up, and finally bought himself his own store.
Isn't that wonderful? What a great success story that is. Now, what was the last position you held when you were in Brentwood, Phil? You were in the Sonderling building.
I was the home economics teacher at the Sonderling building, or the Sonderling High School.
Why did you retire when you did?
Well, being a home economics teacher is a very, very physical and mental position. And we were constantly having to be on the go in the classrooms. It's a hands-on learning experience. And I physically felt I wasn't able to keep up with the students as well as I had been. And also I saw a change coming in students, which I really wanted to avoid.
Yeah, right. And I think the truth is that many of us, myself included, just got tired.
Well, I didn't get as burned out as a lot of other teachers because in home economics, you were constantly having your curriculums changed. You were constantly becoming recertified. And I wrote curriculum for the state of New York, so I was really very much on top of that. Mm-hmm. So I kept going back to school, and I received a lot of different informational, educational things, and I changed my classroom techniques to keep up with the times.
Right.
But
sure did. I can remember the things.
Well, John, we certainly were more advanced. I mean, we had our classes sitting in the round for years long before they even had discussed that. We found that the students learned better in circles where they could see each other and have that kind of communications.
You were a trailblazer in the department as well. I remember you doing many things that were way ahead of what was going on at the time.
Well, you try because you don't always get students that are very academically inclined, and sometimes they when guidance counselors gave you students, they really called them losers, and I never saw any of my students as losers. They were all achievers. They just some learned better than others in different kinds of classroom situations.
How many years total were you in education?
36.
What year did you start?
I started in Brentwood in September of 1964. Before that, I was 3.5 years in Saddlebrook High School in Saddlebrook, New Jersey. And before that, I did about a year at Julia Richmond High School in New York City.
Wow. So you were a New York City public school teacher before?
For a very short time. It was quite an experience.
What from that experience did you bring to Brentwood?
Well, my mentor in college, Dr. Ekstrom, really was the one who, when I first started teaching, my very first actual teaching job was in a department and at a high school that when I went for an interview was only a plot of land and the building hadn't been built yet. I was going to be the only home economics teacher, and the school had no idea of what direction they were taking. So I actually set that department up, ordered the books, the equipment, the supplies, and was the chief of the department. And we opened that high school 6th through the 9th grade with possibly 40 teachers just out of college themselves.
Wow.
And that was an experience. You had to be a survivor, and you were the only one in your department. So I was constantly going back to New York City, where their home economics educational goals were very much laid out and written. So, and I guess when I came to Brentwood, I was really looking for a position. I needed a position, and that opportunity came through Brentwood. And it's not that Brentwood was the only home economics job available, because there aren't many home economics teachers in each department. So you really had to go where there was an opening and then hope for the best.
Yeah. Who was the principal when you came into the district?
Mr. Weaver.
Okay. You must have a few Fred Weaver stories, I would imagine.
Well, my interview, actually, I was a waitress at Howard Johnson's and a hostess at Howard Johnson's at the South Shore Mall when it first opened up. And I also had my name on the list for substituting. And I substituted in chemistry and in biology, and I had met Mr. Weaver, Mr. Kerlock, and Mrs. Knott.
Yes.
And the home economics teacher, Myrtle Lewis, is going in for a very minor operation, and Mr. Weaver had her out for the whole rest of the year. The poor woman was never going to come back, but they asked me to fill in. And while I was subbing there for the 3 or 4, or maybe even it was a month, he would come in and observe and watch and etc. And I got a phone call one day from Mrs. Knott, who said to me, Phyllis, we have an opening at the high school. The Sondling building is going to be open. When I started there, it was just the one high school,
yes.
and it was the R.O.B.S building. How would you like a position? And I said, wow, I'd love it. And she said, okay, you'll be teaching probably with Mrs. Why don't you come up and we'll have an interview with Mr. Weaver. And of course I went up, and the interview was, I don't even know what words to use. However, his concern at that time was, you have 2 small children at home, and who was going to take care of them, and how are you going to be able to fulfill your duties as a teacher? And I remember saying to him and looking him straight in the face and saying, I would not be here if I didn't have my child's care taken care of already. Everything is under control. And he said, oh, and who cleans your house? And I said, I have somebody. He said, oh, does she have any time for myself? My wife would love to have somebody. So I went home and I said to my person,
Yes.
this person who was helping me out, listen, you've got to do me a favor. So she also went and helped at his house.
Isn't that amazing?
And
Was he the only one that interviewed you for the?
I think Mr.
position?
Kerlock was sitting in the room, and Mrs. Knott was sitting in the room, and they both had. His concern was that I had chewed gum.
Yes.
I remember that, and my blinds weren't even. I remember that distinctly. But evidently, I was either the only home economics teacher available, or I made such a wonderful impression because I gave him my cleaning girl that he hired me. And there, it's, as they say, it's history.
There it is.
It's history. My other Mr. Weaver story is that Bill Lane, Shirley Hodges, Jack Zuckerman, and myself would play bridge in the teacher's lounge during lunch period. And Mr. Weaver was very concerned that I was not getting out and meeting and commingling with the rest of the faculty. That really was not very good, and I wasn't going to last if I didn't mingle. 32 years later, I was still lasting.
Yes. When you retired, and you began to look around for another place to change your residence, you were going to move from Bayshore and ultimately decided to go where you are now, Phil. What did you find you had a lot of time for other things now? You say, well, we haven't talked. What have you been doing since you retired?
I've been so busy, I don't know which end is up.
Really?
We babysit 2 days a week. We were babysitting 3 days a week
For your grandchildren?
for our grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And we are babysitting now 2 days a week, from about 7:30 in the morning till 6:30 in the evening. We've been doing this now for 5 years. We used to travel from Bayshore to Riverdale, where they first lived.
Wow.
Then from Bayshore to Millwood.
Oh boy.
And then we moved to Brewster and went from Brewster to Millwood, which was a very short ride. Then they moved to Richfield, so now we're doing it from Brewster to Richfield, which is about a half-hour drive.
Yes.
So that kept us very busy. And then I can't stay put for very long. I did some substituting at the Brewster School District, which I really did not care for. They're in desperate needs of subs, but don't use their subs wisely. And I was being put into the middle school, which I didn't care for. And the only times I was put into home economics was when their home economics teacher was going for a long period of time. And then they were grateful to have somebody who could do exactly what a home economics teacher should do, which I liked and I enjoyed, because this teacher had a full-time teacher's aide who did everything alongside with you.
Yeah.
But I didn't care for the subbing, and I became involved in I live in a condominium townhouse complex, and I became involved and became first a member of the board of directors.
Oh boy.
And then I became president of the board of directors. Yes. And I also changed my membership from the local chapter from Delta Kappa Gamma International Alpha Delta to Delta Kappa Gamma Alpha Omicron. And I'm now president of that.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm ending my first 2 years as presidency are up, and I'm going to accept it for another. They've asked me to take it on for another 2 years.
2 years.
So I have always been busy.
I see.
Always.
Did you was there any down? It sounds like this is all wonderful stuff. Has everything that happened to you been wonderful?
Well, other than the usual illnesses that one has as they get a little bit older, George and I really have having a wonderful time. Our first trip was to Israel right after we retired. We did an Alaskan cruise.
Oh, jeez, great.
We do timeshare. We go
Where's
back
the
to Myrtle.
timeshare?
Well, it's in New Bern and Myrtle Beach, and we go back to Myrtle Beach every year. And we travel with my friends Betty and Charlie. I go to their timeshare, but they go to ours. We went to Branson, Missouri. Everybody should go there at least once. It's marvelous.
Oh.
This year we're going to San Diego on timeshare. And very possibly we're thinking of joining R.O.B.S on one of their travels. They've been to Turkey, to France, and they're planning Spain.
Did they go to? They didn't go to France.
Provence.
Did
they went to Provence.
Okay.
This past September.
Okay.
But no, I've had no downtime. It's been taking care of 2 grandchildren. I have to say, I would not want to be a kindergarten or a nursery school teacher.
Yes.
I'm glad I taught child psychology and child development and parenting for 32 years, because otherwise I don't know if I could have.
Yeah, the energy that is required of anybody.
They're unbelievable.
I have a lot of respect for kindergarten teachers and first grade teachers.
Well, my son-in-law once said to me, which made George and I very pleased, was that he didn't think Johnny would have had such a wonderful personality and been such a pleasant child if it hadn't been for his grandparents helping to raise him.
Isn't that a nice?
So that was like that's like the Tony Awards of the world.
Better.
And that really made us very proud. And I can see that children do need to be home with caregivers that are our relatives.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting because today's parents, many of them, are experiencing what some of our grandparents experienced.
Yes.
Both having to work, not being able to be home with the kids, and it's very, very difficult. Doesn't mean that they're not interested in school. When did you first come to Brentwood, Phil? You may have mentioned it before.
We moved to Brentwood in May of 1962 from New Jersey.
Okay.
And I did not work for the first year and a half to 2 years, and then I found it necessary to start working, and that's when I went to become a waitress and did some substitute teaching.
What brought you to Brentwood initially?
Well, my ex-husband had been transferred from New Jersey to Long Island, and we started looking in Westbury and ended up in Bayshore.
Okay.
Because there was a model across the street from Peter Pan Diner in 1961 that was called the Fairfield Estates, and we could afford that. So we started in Westbury and ended up in Bayshore. But then his company moved back to New York City. So it was a very long commute for him as well.
Do you have any vivid memories of Brentwood in the early 60s, the way it was then? Is there anything that stands out? Because something you said a few moments ago sat with me, and that is you said you began to notice a change in the students that you were working with by the end of your tenure as a teacher.
I think the 1960s were difficult for a time there also. I can remember in my double period consumer ed classes, one boy in particular, Ed, he would have fit right here into the 1990s. I think there was more respect. There were less outside influences. I don't remember, unless it's my naivety, I don't remember drugs being so rampant. Of course, we didn't have the computers and the internet and the onlines. I'm sure a lot of child abuse was going on then as well as now. But I don't think we as teachers were as aware of it as much then. And I thought they came to school a little bit better prepared to learn. There were our times when we had very disruptive students as well.
Oh, sure.
In 60s, 70s, the 80s, and even the 90s.
Oh, sure.
But
There was a lot of social protest even back
yes.
then. Yeah.
Well, Brentwood was a very unique district. I
Sure.
mean, what were we? The largest Hispanic school district outside New York City.
Absolutely.
The second or sixth largest school district in the state of New York.
Correct. Yes.
And I used to say it was an inner suburban city school district.
Yes.
And
You're certified in home economics.
I'm also certified in administration. I did pursue and receive an administrative
Okay.
degree from Hofstra University.
Okay.
And I did do a assistant principalship with, who was Eva's husband?
Marty Efron.
Marty Efron, one summer at South Junior High as my internship. I had been hoping that after Mrs. Kaysen had retired, they would have a department chairman for home economics. So I had really tried to prepare myself for that. However, that never materialized because they phased it out. And then Frank Lurch, Dr. Lurch, the art department chairman, became the home economics department chairman.
Yes.
And he was a tremendous fan of home economics.
Yes.
Tremendous.
Yes.
And then after he retired, instead of picking one of the home economics teachers that was certified, they then took Mr. Condon from the business department and put them in with us. And that was one of the other reasons that I saw the handwriting on the wall. Home economics was not being as respected. I thought that for a long time there, we had won the battle.
Yes.
And we were being respected. We were a department of, and I tried to think back, 8 or 9 teachers.
I remember those days.
We
sure.
built up, when I first started, it was Mrs. Kaysen and Mrs. Murdy Lewis in the Sonderling, and myself and Linda Williams at the R.O.B.S building. And we built ourselves up to almost 9 teachers.
Wow.
And when I left, it was myself and Mrs. Gruskin.
Wow. Yes.
And when I left, it was Mrs. Gruskin.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, of course, they'd bring in a teacher from the junior high every once in a while to pick up the extra class that they needed.
Phil, do you think it had anything to do with the economics of it, or was it a cultural change that we were going through?
I don't think it was a cultural change. I think we're an expensive department to keep
Yes.
up, and it was purely economics. I also don't think that I don't think anyone observed us enough to understand and respect what we were doing for the students that weren't academically inclined. We had wonderful, wonderful students who have turned out to be very, very successful in their lives, not necessarily college graduates.
Have you kept in touch with some of these people, or do you hear
I
from them?
correspond with a student from 1959.
Really?
She gave me my baby shower when I was pregnant with
Isn't that
Edith.
wonderful?
Jackie Messina from Fairlawn, and we still correspond. In fact, her oldest and my oldest have the same age children. She's a grandparent. I correspond with a Pat Lebowski-Levy, who still lives in Brentwood, who all her children went through the Brentwood School District. And we're surrogate grandparents to Joe and Donna Pellegrino. Donna was a student of mine along with 4 other students who were very, very close. And Donna has a little boy who is not little anymore. He's in the 6th grade. No, the 5th grade. They live in Boca Raton. We've gone to see them once. But she had asked us to be his grandparents because she felt it. So yes, we do stay in touch, and I've had many correspondences all the time with students.
Now, because of your activism, I'm going to call it that, because you were always very, very active in school in one thing or another. Were there certain pet projects or pet activities that you look back on with a certain fondness? Some that stand out? Because I know.
The planning committee.
Okay, tell me about what you remember about that. And what stands out in your mind about it?
You know, I was thinking back last night, and not any one thing in the planning committee or the union stands out, except that I realized, and I think that I even appreciated even more than I ever appreciated before, how strong and wonderful the Brentwood Union was and still is. Because I'm up at Brewster where they are now just beginning to get very angry because they've been without a contract for 3 years. Carmel, no contracts for 3 years. And I scream at the television and scream into the newspaper, where are their union leaders? Why aren't they doing something?
Yes.
Why aren't they doing any job actions? I remember walking the picket line
Yes.
only after or before school, never during our class time,
Yes.
to get our contracts, to get our pay raises. And I look back now and I say, thank goodness for the school board.
Yes.
Thank goodness for the superintendent of school, and thank goodness for the Brentwood Teachers Association, because it was just a wonderful experience. Class size, that is the thing that sticks out in my mind. How anybody could think that a home economics teacher could teach 30 students in 5 kitchens,
Yes.
and even 25 in 5
Yes.
kitchens. So that was the biggest buggeroo we had.
Sure.
On the sewing machines, because back when we were teaching parenting, clothing construction, and foods, we had lab situations for almost all of them.
Yep.
Later on in the 80s and the 90s, when the curriculum was rewritten, we went into, we even had interior decorating. We went into more, we did just child care, child psychology, parenting, and foods and nutrition, because that's what our students needed the most.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the clothing construction did not, the enrollments were so low that unfortunately it was dropped.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but I remember class sizes and remember being at the union meetings and.
Did you have another role in terms of your union involvement, Phil, at any time? Were you a building
I was
delegate?
a building delegate.
That's what I thought.
Yes, I was a building delegate for many years,
Mhm.
both in the R.O.B.S and the Sonderling building, and I worked for a long time with Bill Mullity, who was the building rep.
And you worked when that was while Stan was principal.
Yes, I think I was part of the planning committees for as long as they had been formed that I'm aware
Yes. Uh-huh.
of. Even with, was it Mr. Weaver and then Mr. Curlick?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Well, there's so many things that I wanted to ask you. What do you miss most, though, about your years in Brentwood?
Getting dressed up and going to work in my suit.
Yeah.
I miss that. I miss the students. I miss the camaraderie of the students. I think that's what kept you in focus. It kept you in tune with them. I miss that.
It keeps you feeling young, too.
Yes, except a 5 and a 3-year-old can keep you feeling very, very young. Very, very young. But I miss that type of conversation.
If there's one thing that you could point to and say, well, this is what I don't miss, what would it have been?
Teenagers' attitudes.
Changing attitudes.
Their
yes.
attitudes.
Yeah.
I think they always had attitudes, but the older we got, their attitudes graded on as worse.
Yeah.
I don't think teenagers, by and large, are any different than they were. I don't like the long baggy pants.
Yes.
I don't like the yo or their little statements.
Yes.
But I'm sure, and I can't remember them, back in the 60s and in the 70s, one of these teenagers,
Yeah, my intuition tells me you're right about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the older we get, the more we go back to what we remember as teenagers, and we kind of forget that these teenagers that we had back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were doing very much what these teenagers of today are doing. And the media picks up so much. That's what we didn't have in the 60s
That's true.
either.
Speaking about going back, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But when were you born?
Well, the alternative of not answering that is that I might not be here. So it was June 11th, 1937.
That's right. Okay. That's you were in June. You're 2 months older than I am, by the way. We're both Roosevelt babies.
And we both retired at the same time.
And we both retired at the same time. But where were you born?
I was born in Washington Heights.
In Manhattan.
In Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived on Fort Washington Avenue until I moved after getting married. So I did not move out of Washington Heights until 1960.
Wow.
Well, no, before that. I graduated from Hunter College with a Bachelor of Science degree, accepted the position at Saddlebrook, then first learned how to drive a car, a 1958 Rambler, then moved to New Jersey, and then moved to Long Island.
Did you come from a large family? Or
No,
small
I was an
family?
only child.
Only child.
And my mother was an only child.
Ah.
And my father had a brother who was killed in World War I, a sister who passed away in infancy, and then the aunt that I remember, Evelyn, who has deceased, she married very late in life and had no children.
Were you close with that aunt?
Yes,
You were.
I was very close with that aunt.
So if I were to ask you what were some of the adults, the older adults that were significant in your life besides
Well,
your
that
mother
was
and
my
father?
Aunt Evelyn, and then I had my father's cousins, which were Tilly and Sydney Hess, and I was the only girl in that lineage of cousins. So when I was growing up, I was the princess.
Okay.
But I've decided that when men grow up and marry, they cling to the wife's side of the family and have a tendency to forget that the relatives, especially the female relatives on their side of the family, would like to have been remembered. So although my father had a lot of cousins, and I have not stayed in touch with them.
Yes.
My mother had a first cousin, Eleanor, and she had a daughter, Amy, and Amy and I are of the same age, which is 42. She's moved us up. And I remember them. They're a very strong family. In fact, Eleanor has gone almost 10 years, and Abby is 93. And I just have to share this from a 5-year-old. Abby's very old at 93. If he's that old, is he going to fit into the house? Has he grown that big too?
Well, that's wonderful.
But
What was your mom like, Phil?
my mother was assertive before the years of being assertive.
Mhm.
Uh,
So that's where you get it.
Oh, I think I got it from the day I was born. I now think that the technique she must have used. She told me from the time I can remember, when I was handed to my mother in the hospital, and back then they kept you, for 14 days or 15 days,
Yes.
the nurse said to my mother at Atlantic Hill Hospital, if you don't get the upper hand with her right away, she's going to rule the roost. Now, I don't know if that was an actual story, if my mother thought of that, because
Yes.
I think I've always been in some type of a leadership capacity.
Yeah.
And enjoy it.
And enjoying it.
And
sure.
enjoy it.
Let's see. You grew up in Washington Heights. You must have
Went to George Washington High School.
I was going to say you must have a lot of early memories of growing
Oh,
up.
I remember pedaling across the George Washington Bridge with my best friend, Marilyn Goodman, going across the George Washington Bridge and then heading south in Jersey to the Palisades Amusement Park
Wow.
and going swimming there. And for nickels, winning towel after towel. So my mother said, what are you going to do with all these towels? I remember the YMWCA at 178th Street before Washington Avenue, where we hung out.
Uh-huh.
I remember going to a woodworking class and a metals shop class after school, where you made little ashtrays and candy dishes out of metal.
Was this at the Y?
At the Y.
Mhm.
My mother was a school secretary at Junior High School 115, and I remember I was Mrs. Hess's daughter. My mother would not let me attend junior high there because I had made the Rapids, and she was afraid everybody would say I only made the Rapids because I was Mrs. Hess's daughter.
The Rapids was an
Rapids was an
accelerated
advanced class.
Uh-huh.
So I went up to PS 187, which was an 8th grade school. So as a 6th grader, from down below, across the other side of the tracks, I went up to 187 and hated every minute of it. And really didn't enjoy school then until I got to George Washington High School, where I had met friends, which we are still Marilyn and my friend Lillian and Helen, we still get together. We're from high school.
What school? Washington?
George Washington.
George Washington.
George Washington High School, overlooking the East River. Yeah. And I do remember my first experiences with a home economics teacher, Mrs. Owens. First, we had to make aprons. Then we had to make a hat with their name on it. Then we made cream spinach, and we made chocolate chip cookies. And I remember getting into the kitchens very early one day and opening up the spigots under the sink just enough so that when she opened them up in her usual demonstration, it would spray all over her. That's the first time I'm confessing it in public.
Wonderful.
I swore I would never be a home economics teacher.
Oh, and look.
We
and
made
look-
our own graduation dresses.
Did
She
you?
forgot to pre-wash the fabric. So when we washed our fabrics to come down to graduation all looking alike, the dresses would have fit Barbie dolls.
Oh.
Maybe I did learn something from her.
Yes, I'm sure. What other schools did you attend? You mentioned the elementary and the high school. Is there a junior high in there someplace?
No,
There wasn't.
no, I was supposed to go, but I went from PS 173 to PS 187 to
Yes.
George Washington High
Okay.
School, to accepted at Pratt Institute, but went to Hunter College, College, and graduated from Hunter with a bachelor's and a master's of science.
Now, for the family, for your own family, and for the kids that will be listening to this someday, do you have any memories of your grandparents that you can share?
No, yes, I have. Well, not my mother's side of the family, but my father's side of the family. My grandfather used to call me Schnuckelfritz, and would sit me on his lap so I could dunk donuts in his coffee.
Yes.
And my grandmother was a very little lady who played the piano and sang beautifully, and it was always enjoyable to go in there.
What were Phil, and when you were in school, what were the subjects that you loved the most?
None.
You didn't care for school that much.
It was just a place to be. I hated math. Mr. Orleans.
Okay.
I worked in the math department when students used to work for their advisors, and I worked in the math department. And Mr. Orleans said, "William and Phyllis, please don't take intermediate algebra. Please don't take trigonometry. I'll do anything, but don't take them." But we took them, and we survived. I did not like Latin. That was 4 years of Latin in one classroom. I was not good in French, and I did not like math. I liked English. I took the grammar classes in English. I guess I liked my sciences too, but went to college without any chemistry, and that was a rude awakening.
Yeah. When you mentioned before that you had worked part-time as a waitress when you started teaching.
Well, that was in between my New Jersey job and finding a position out on Long Island.
Okay, that was not while you were teaching, that was before.
Well, I tried to do both after I got my Brentwood job, but that didn't last very well because I was on the night shift at work, the 4 to midnight or the 4 to closing. So, no, I did not stay with the although I have to say the profits and the money were good as waitressing.
Yes, and the fact of the matter is that in those years, many teachers had to work second jobs to make ends
I think my
meet.
starting salary in New Jersey was $4,000 a year.
This was in what year?
In 1960.
1960.
Actually, it was 1958 because we graduated June of 58. I started teaching in September of 58. And my friends from college were going out to Long Island and they were making $4,200. Didn't know why I was going to settle for $4,000.
Yes.
My starting salary in September of 1964 was $6,400
This is in Brentwood.
in
yeah.
Brentwood.
Mhm.
Was 64. So what did the unions do for us?
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
They helped us with very substantial pay raises.
You bet. What was I going to say? You mentioned class size before too as being key, particularly where home economics is concerned. That the class size, which is sometimes dismissed by critics of education as being unimportant, is crucial to doing, but particularly in an area like home economics. Is there a high point that you of your tenure as a teacher that you can say these were the best years for me, the best time?
I think every year was a high point when you saw students who would struggle all year long with so many difficulties, graduate, go on and become successful, and then come back and say to you, "Do you remember me?" I mean, I remember so many. A young man named Tommy who was a special ed boy, a young girl named Donna Thomas, who also was learning disabled. I did have the privilege finally of teaching a class of learning disabled students of 7 of them. And that was a high point because I saw so many accomplishments with these young men and women. But every year was a high point when you have students who can come back and visit you and remember you and say, "Do you remember me?"
Phil,
The first boy in home economics, Bill Ubelecker,
yes.
who went on to become a chef in the armed services,
Wow.
and came back and seeked me out. I was at the Sonderling building by then. Came in and looked at all the boys in the class and said, I remember when I was your first boy. And those girls didn't back me out the door. So yes, that was a high point, seeing the boys being welcomed into class and staying through the parenting classes because they suddenly realized that they might become fathers. The biggest disappointments were the unwed mothers. If that was to be the low points, was when you saw students that had potential that suddenly found themselves giving birth to their own.
Yes.
That was the low points.
And the importance of those courses and that curriculum today is even greater than it was.
And it's not recognized
And it's
yet.
not recognized.
If every, they worry about the language requirements, which I think should be started in elementary schools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure.
There's no
Sure.
reason why children can't become bilingual if taught immediately,
Immediately.
but they don't, and they fail to recognize the parenting classes are crucial to our young teenagers of today.
Any glance at the headlines will make eminently clear today. You, I was going to, I had a question I wanted to ask you a moment ago, and it's just slipped away from me. It's going to have to come back. I know what it was, Phil. And that is, you and I both taught during some years of real crisis. There were national catastrophes, there were tragedies, there were assassinations, there were traumatic events that affected us profoundly in the classroom that we still remember where we were and what we were doing. Do you have any memories of any of those?
I remember
events?
Kennedy's assassination, but I was standing in my kitchen when it came over the television.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what when the
Challenger
went up.
Martin Luther King's assassination.
I think I might have avoided being in the classroom. I don't remember any of those.
Okay.
I don't remember any of those being as part of my classroom where I was at that point in time.
Okay. What? Who influenced you? That's the question I want to ask you. Who influenced you to become a teacher?
My mother. My mother was my inspiration. She was my greatest fan. My father also. The both of them. Without them, I don't think I'd be where I am today. My mother and father. They
were both role models of
they were hardworking, middle class people. We were probably not middle class. We were probably lower. What's the other word? Not middle class. What's below middle
working class?
Well, working class would be middle class. Isn't this terrible?
Yeah. I don't know.
I think we were poor, and I never knew I was poor.
Yeah.
I
can
never knew.
identify.
And my parents were just, they didn't. I was going to college and I was graduating, and I think because I was around my mother so much in her school system, and she was the school secretary for over 45 years in the same school.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the reasons I became a teacher, because I can remember those teachers' names.
What advice, because we're getting to the end of our time together here, and I know that there are some things that you might want to tell us about that I didn't even ask you about or I've forgotten to ask you about, but if you were to give advice to a young person or any person at all that's going into teaching, a lot more people today with second careers are going into teaching to give back. Is there a word of advice, or is there anything that you can convey to them that might...
To those who might go into teaching
Yes.
or in teaching.
Those who might go into teaching now are thinking of going into teaching. What might you suggest to them that might be of help?
Persevere. Patience. Don't go into it because of financial rewards. Go into it for the rewards that you're going to get back from humanity. That's your greatest rewards. And don't give up. Teaching is, without a teacher, there'd be no doctors, lawyers, or scientists. And I think people forget that we're the lowest on the totem pole. So teachers are the backbone of your society, and there can't be a finer profession than teaching. I just wish everybody would recognize that.
Me too. Is there anything, Phil, that we have forgotten to talk about or that we haven't mentioned?
Oh, well, I do remember Mrs. Knott going up the hallway with a ruler, measuring the girls' skirts to make sure that they were below the knees a certain. And I think she would never have approved when we put slacks on girls. And then, when the female teachers got very angry and said, "Wait a minute, we want to wear slacks too. No jeans." And I think that was my biggest bugaboo. I felt that so many high school teachers did not dress professionally once we allowed us to dress down, so to speak.
Yeah. There was an image change that took place. There was, and parents looked to that too.
Yeah.
I mean, people will treat you as your clothing asks them to treat you.
And I really saw a tremendous change in the way students acted in school once we permitted this dressing down. Although they said absolutely not.
Would you be in favor of uniforms today for kids?
I don't see why not. I think it would take a lot of that social pressure off of people, and even as far as budgets are concerned in the home. But yes, I would be in favor of it. To the point where maybe they could have 3 or 4 different kinds of plaids or solids with 2 or 3. Not a military type of dress, but a dress where we're not kind of concentrating on whether they're wearing the latest styles and the latest sneakers, but we're concentrating more on our education and what we're going to learn.
Phyllis, I can't thank you enough, and I can't tell you how much Dottie and Jack and all of us are going to enjoy listening to this as we.
Sure, they're going to have a good laugh on me now. I can just hear them.
They're going to appreciate some of the fine things that you have had to say about teachers and about our unions. Phyllis Baumann, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. Hi, Casey.